Welcome to the Team Teach podcast. I'm Clare, and in each episode you'll find me talking with an expert guest to learn more about behaviour. We squeeze a lot into each episode. You'll listen to the latest thinking in behaviour, continue your professional development with our book recommendation, and then I'll send you away with 3 practical tips you can use in your setting. I'm joined today by Andrea Reid-Kelly. Andrea is a special educational need and disability behaviour consultant with a master's degree in Autism and Education. She has over 25 years of teaching experience spanning mainstream, specialist provision, early years, secondary, class teaching and advisory services. And today, Andrea and I are talking about a gradual and graded approach to special needs provision in school. Enjoy the episode. Hi Andrea, how are you?
I'm not too bad, thank you. Not too bad. Nice now that there's a bit of sunshine outside.
Oh, it's very variable, the weather. And I'm guessing that we're in different parts of the country. I'm down in Devon today.
Yeah. We're in the Midlands and the sun is peeking through some clouds, which is, I'm ever hopeful. Let's see.
Ever optimistic. And I don't know how I can segue that into the topic, but we are ever optimistic that definitely. We can provide graduated responses to EHCP plans, so educational healthcare plans. And that's really the topic that we're focusing on, sort of how to make sure that we're using that graduated response and the difference that can make for parents, carers and schools. But I wondered if you could start off, Andrea, just with a short bit about your experience and the topic today.
Yeah, so I've been a special needs teacher since specifically special needs since the early noughties, but I've been teaching since 1995 and moved practically straight away into working with children that had autism, and then kind of broadened that out as time went on. But I've worked in 2 different education authorities, autism support services, and worked in mainstream schools, special schools, directly teaching as well. Currently, I'm an independent SEND consultant and I work closely with schools in different capacities, depending on what they need. Sometimes that's working with the SENCO or in place of the SENCO if they're off sick or needing, their schools are in between SENCOs. So sometimes I'm picking up SEND tasks around schools.
Yeah, and we're really lucky to have your experience on the podcast today and actually your experience around this topic, because I think it's not something that we've actually really covered, this idea of a graduated response around educational healthcare plans. I suppose a neat starting point would be to think about what a graduated response is with educational healthcare plans and why it's important to have that.
Yeah, so the principle is that not every child needs, that has special needs an EHCP, an educational healthcare plan. That it's not necessarily always appropriate for individual pupils. But what really is important is that schools have an approach that a pathway that is appropriate for all the individual pupils, and it starts off with simple classroom monitoring of the class teacher. So it's about really good provision that is in the class that's responsive to all pupil needs, and it's sort of the responsibility for that lies with the class teacher. So they're looking at how children are responding to learning opportunities and adapting their practice to suit the individual needs of the class. And this is the basic principle that everybody's doing, their job. They're doing really good responsive teaching, and they might be changing things for individual pupils. And that's basically where we're at to start off with. And the teacher needs to be looking at those pupils and thinking, is this working for them? Do I need to adjust things? And that's what they're doing. If they still start think, well, even with these adjustments, this isn't working for this pupil, then they're asking their colleagues for advice, support. Have you got any thoughts, any strategies? You might be asking the teacher that's taught them before, a more experienced teacher perhaps, and then your SENCO as well.
Mm,
Your SEND coordinator, the specialist within the school that has an overview of the
mhm,
SEND provision within the school. The graduated response is set out in the special needs policy
mm,
that goes across all schools within the UK, right? So that the graduated response says it should start with the class teacher and then it moves on if
mm,
needed. It's a cyclical process of assessing, planning, reviewing and doing, and then you go back to assessing. Is it working? Do I need to do anything different? Where can I get support and advice? Senko might become involved if necessary, and then that the pupil will be potentially placed on a SEND register,
mm,
possibly. And that would be the SEND register has certain codes. That's where pupils are put onto a list so that the school are monitoring really carefully and effectively what is happening with pupils. And on that register, there's certain codes. So you might have a code that says that the pupil's just been monitored, and that's N. So there's either no special needs or the pupil is being monitored. And then it might go on to further a K register, and that is where there's a suspicion that there might be some special needs,
mm,
and we're putting in certain practices that we know are effective. So, for instance, if we've got a child that we think has impulse control issues, might be affecting behaviour, might be affecting concentration within the class and not able to access the curriculum effectively. So we might put in strategies that we know are effective by and large for pupils that have concentration issues. It might be brain breaks, it might be
mm,
access to tools that help them self-regulate. So if they like to use their hands to play with things and that helps them concentrate, that they might have a concentration tool. Often we call these fidget toys. Schools have different names for them because of the phrase fidget toy might imply that it's a fun thing that everybody needs, and it's not necessarily the case. It's just
mhm,
something that
mhm.
helps a child regulate. So we might be putting in things that we understand are really supportive at that point, but we monitor it again. We assess it. Is it working? Is it supportive? And we go through that whole cycle again of
Mm.
assess, plan, do, and review.
If you work with parents and carers, our family engagement training equips you with the skills, knowledge, and understanding to build positive relationships. Help your families understand and support their child's behaviour, recognise the challenges and opportunities in your organisation, and receive an exclusive range of resources you can use to practically support your families. Take a look at this exciting training option on the Team Teach website. I just wanted to ask a question about the kind of the first line of response where it's teachers kind of assessing what's going on in the room, like trying
Yeah.
various strategies. And I suppose just with your experience, I'm wondering if sometimes that first response before it gets to the send register, if that first response sometimes, I don't know, that can be tricky because I just think it's quite subjective sometimes how people kind of see behaviour. I just was wondering about that. It was on my mind.
Yeah, I mean, it is subjective because when we do Team Teach training, we do talk about what pushes our buttons
Mm.
and what pushes their buttons, the children's
Hmm.
buttons, and that can trigger behaviours or and even sometimes I'm a big fan of teachers. I've been a teacher a long time, and I know the vast majority of people that I've worked with have been amazing.
Yeah.
And have been great teachers. What I'm about to say, I don't want it to be teacher bashing, but
Yeah.
sometimes your approach doesn't suit a child.
Mm.
Teach doesn't necessarily suit a child, but the mark of a really good teacher is somebody that really is a reflective practitioner.
Yeah.
And you do need to think about, well, is it my approach that is making the difference here? So is there something that I can do that can change? Even like, I've been teaching for over 25 years, and in the classroom, I would have to think, is it something that I've put into place? Is it the way I've done this for 25 years that I need to shift my perspective and shift my approach? And you have to do that. You know,
Yeah.
it's your responsibility to do that job. You're paid to do that. It's not just about this is how you teach and don't shift from that. You're paid
Mm.
to be a reflective person to adjust your practice to suit the needs of the pupils that you have.
Yeah, I just popped into my head just when we were thinking. It's like a pyramid, isn't it? That the kind of the teacher monitoring, trying, reflecting, doing. And I just thought actually maybe if you don't know or you're lacking some of those skills, that you're going to get loads of children that kind of get sort of referred on.
Yeah, because I mean, this is the thing that not every child that is having difficulties in the classroom has a special need.
Mm,
And just because we might be monitoring and we might be raising, sort of further issues, doesn't mean that the child has a special need. Okay. But it does mean that we have to put things in place to support them, and we might need to adjust our practice. And just because we start that process of
mm,
the graduated response doesn't mean that we're going to get to the point of an educational healthcare plan
mm,
for a pupil. And
mm,
even if a child gets diagnosed with a special need, whether that's attention deficit, autism, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, even if we get diagnosed with something like that, it doesn't mean that we need an educational healthcare plan, because the graduated response might be all that is needed. Okay, and this constant monitoring and evaluating of what is needed, it might be all that is necessary for that pupil. And this is one of the things that I'd be really keen to sort of make sure that people know this. And this
mm,
is from a perspective of also as a parent, and also having special needs myself.
mm,
Just because we have special needs and identified neurodiversity or a rare disease, it doesn't mean necessarily that an educational healthcare plan is absolutely what we need.
mm,
All schools have a budget, and within that budget, there is what's known as the notional budget. And that is, it's not a set money that's separate to everything else that the school receives, but it's what the local education authority estimates a pupil that might have a special need, the amount of money that the school can spare from their budget to support that pupil. And it's not even
mm,
spare, it's that's the really wrong phrase. It's this what the school can put towards supporting that pupil. And that goes up to a maximum of £6,000. Now, the school might not need all of that money to support your child or a specific child in your class. Because what it might just be that that a little bit amount of money can help buy some resources that can be put into place.
mm,
Say if the child's having some physical difficulties that make handwriting difficult, so it could buy some resources for the classroom, specialist pencils, like special tools that you could do some
mm,
autistic work. So it might just pay for a little bit of that. It also helps the school to get support services in, so advisory services. So it might be the communication autism teams, it might
mm,
be occupational therapy, it might be educational psychology. The school, from their notional budget and from the LEA support services, they get a set amount of hours per term, depending on the size of their school and the amount of special needs within that school. They get a certain amount of hours that they can use from those services to come and look, assess, and advise. And the school might be using that as part of their graduated response for a pupil, but that would be like at a higher level. So you might start off at monitoring in the class teacher. Class teacher then raises that with Senko and other team members within the school. They put
mm,
in additional supports. If then, when we come to assess and review that, we think actually we need additional over and above what we usually, the skills we have within school, then they might go to specialist support services. And the notional budget would be covering those things at that sort of area
mm,
of the K part of the register. Now, if you imagine the maximum a school would use for a pupil on the notional budget is £6,000, it doesn't go very far.
mm,
It can't provide for lots, but there's so much a school can do within that because they've got their own skills and experiences, that they can implement strategies within the classroom, that can be supportive. If a school then thinks actually we need to go to the support services and outside professional support like speech and language therapists provided through the local education authority, the school will come to the parents and ask for permission to do that. They can't get access to those services without that permission. However, the school's also in a tricky position because they only have a certain amount of hours for those services. So ordinarily, what will happen is the school has to pinpoint the most urgent cases for those services to be supporting them with. So it would be the highest level of need.
Yeah, it's like a triage.
Yeah, it is a triage. And then if they've used up those hours and they still have pupils that they think, actually, we still need support with these pupils, we still don't feel that our early part of the K register is enough, they will have to buy additional hours.
Yeah.
And sometimes they've used up their notional budget and they don't have additional funds to do that. And so it's a tricky position, because schools are strapped. They really are strapped for cash. And so they have to be very careful where the money's spent. But at the same time, they can be doing lots and lots to support those pupils that are not at the high end of need within their school setting. And it's a case of parents and schools really talking to each other, and really understanding each other's position. Because it can be really, really hard.
Yeah, because I was wondering about that within that journey, can't think of a different word for it, of support for that child or young person. I was wondering what the role of families, parents, carers kind of have within that, and how much agency, if any, around the care and support that child will be offered.
So it should be throughout the process a real open conversation between school staff and parents. And depending on the child's communication levels and ability to be involved in an open, active conversation, the child should be really included in that. Where we might have some communication needs with the pupils, it's up to the people around them, that's the professionals and parents, the family members around them, to be watching. And you can interpret certain things about likes, dislikes, and access from behaviour. So when we're doing team teaching, we're talking about behaviours that, might be tricky or challenging. We talk about, we always have to be like behaviour detectives. And it's the same thing when we're looking at pupils with special needs and what they're what we feel is important for them. It's about really putting ourselves in their position and acting as advocates. So parents and families are advocates, and so are the professional staff members involved with them. As a teacher, we should see ourselves as advocates for the children, but also as working in partnership with families. And that's the ideal situation. From my experience, sometimes that can be tricky. And it can be tricky for various reasons. And the best experience I've had, I've seen schools and parents work together really, really well from a trusting relationship. For some parents, and I've been there and I've seen it personally, supporting people working with schools, it can be really, really hard, because when we've got a child that's got special needs, potentially rare diseases that have special needs as associated with it, or tricky behaviours that really challenge people, as a parent, we can be coming from a real place of fear, distress, and feeling like we need to really be fighting our child's corner. And sometimes that can make it hard for us to see that other people are also trying their very best.
Yeah.
At the same time, I've seen situations where, colleagues that I've worked with have worked so hard and then can be quite defensive about what they're doing within the school, and that can both situations can close our listening ears. And I know that sounds patronizing, that we need to be active listeners to each other and understand that from the part of the schools, there are problems, there are barriers that can cause difficulties with implementation or accessing support that's needed. And from the parents' perspective, they're used to experiencing barriers, and they're used to experiencing not being listened to.
Yeah.
Am I making sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I also was thinking, particularly around the relationship between school and home environments, is that often, in my experience, what parents and carers and families might see at home might be quite different from school. So then it's quite difficult to sort of meet each other's ideas and actually listen, because your experience and the system that you're in is so different.
Yeah, and this is where masking comes in. 100%. This is where active listening is really, really important, because what we see sometimes in school is not necessarily what's presented at home, and vice versa. So sometimes behaviours in school and difficulties that are experienced in school are not seen at home, because the home setting can be more relaxed. There can be fewer demands made. So sometimes in schools, we see children that are not engaged, that find concentration difficult, or can become, dysregulated, and it can cause issues for access for them and other pupils within the school setting. But then those behaviours are not as strong in the home setting. Conversely, we can see the opposite, where we get a very passive child within the school setting, or a child that's sort of goes under the radar but is extremely challenging at home, or dysregulated at home, upset, distressed, saying that they hate school, don't want to come into school. All those things can be happening at school, at home, I should say, whereas at school, we're not seeing those symptoms. And there's a reason for that. So like some of us mask within the school setting and let all those emotions out in the safe place at home. And then on the other hand, some pupils are sort of displaying dysregulated behaviours in school because that's the place where they're dysregulated, but at home they can relax, they can go to their room, they can find their safe space, they can listen to their music or play on the computer, the things that they really, really enjoy, and might not be challenged very much over those things. And in school, they might be feeling very challenged multiple times a day. So it's important that when parents are saying to us, we're seeing this at home, the school can be honest and say, we don't see it in school, but let's gather this information because it's important, and vice versa. That the home is believing that this is happening in school. Let's work together to work it out. It's kind of a fallacy that with things like attention deficit and autism, that what you see should be happening in every setting. To an extent, that's true, but it's not necessarily, it can be a misleading phrase. It can lead people to dismiss a concern. Okay. And the key thing for me is, if I'm thinking as a teacher in a school setting, I must not act as a gatekeeper. And sometimes that does happen. The reason that I'm saying that is none of us, I'm presuming, in school are trained as assessors to diagnose. We're not there to diagnose, but we are there to raise concerns, to monitor, to supervise, put in provision, and then go to the key experts that we need to be able to gather evidence and move things forward. We're there to act. In schools, we are the linchpin. And we must remember that we're the linchpin to pupil needs. Okay. And sometimes it needs to go to assessment for diagnosis. Sometimes it doesn't, because what we're doing within the school setting is appropriate.
And I suppose that really encapsulates what you've talked about across this episode, that idea of that graduated response sometimes is enough, and sometimes the assessment process isn't needed at that time. But I'm just a bit conscious of time, Andrea, and I just wondered if you could finish off with 3 top tips.
Yeah, I mean, my first thing would be that everybody involved needs to be an active listener.
Yeah.
Like staff, families, we need to really listen to each other and understand each other's perspectives. There are barriers from both sides in terms of provision sometimes. So sometimes that can be funding, that can be accessing the right support services through school. And the schools, I have never come across a school that isn't trying their best.
Yeah.
But they might need advice and support that they've not been able to access at that point. At the same time, parents need to feel that they can advocate for their pupil, their child, and not feel dismissed. So it's important schools do that. Then also, the parents need to be listening to the schools and understanding that the graduated response is really good, and if it's robust and you're asking the right questions and you're sure your child is getting the right supports at the right time, then that's okay, and you might not need to go to the highest level, and that's absolutely fine. So that's the first top tip. The second one is that none of us should be acting as gatekeepers. We need to really be thinking about, like, how do we move this forward? Are external services important here? And obviously, clearly and honestly thinking about that. And the third thing is going back to, don't fret if they don't have an EHCP. An EHCP might not be necessary at all, but do be clear about what supports are needed and are they in place.
That's absolutely brilliant. It's so clear what you've gone through on this episode today, Andrea. So thanks so much for your time, and I'll catch up with you soon.
Yeah, you're welcome.
You've been listening to the Team Teach podcast. It's been great to have you here with us as we discuss behaviour, communication, and the ways we can best support those in our care. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.